Welcome to The Debate, Lead with Purpose, Mastering the Art of Constant Change. Today we analyze the ideas from the book The Agile Edge, Master Iteration, Accelerate Innovation, and Lead with Purpose. Now, imagine spending 4 years and, $150,000 on a law degree, only to realize on your very first day at the firm that you absolutely loathe the day-to-day work.
Oof. Yeah, that is a nightmare scenario.
Right? It's brutal. But what if you could have figured that out in a single week for $0? Today, we are asking a pretty radical question. What if the traditional sweeping 5-year life plan is just completely dead?
Dead? I mean, that's a strong word.
Well, in our hyper-competitive, fluid world, relying on rigid, long-term planning is basically a recipe for irrelevance. To survive, I argue we have to look to the frameworks normally reserved for tech giants. We must apply agile, lean startup, and design thinking methodologies to our personal goals. Treating life transitions as rapid iterations rather than these grand fixed destinies.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because the proposition that we take the very methodologies used to deploy software and optimize factory floors and forcefully map them onto the messy, emotional, organic reality of human existence, that is deeply troubling to me.
Troubling how?
Well, while I'll grant that these frameworks are undeniably effective for launching a tech product, treating a human life as a product to be relentlessly optimized carries severe risks. I mean, the idea of applying continuous deployment to personal identity lacks long-term viability, and quite frankly, it sounds like a fast track to profound psychological burnout.
See, I disagree. Burnout usually comes from being trapped in a life you didn't actually want to build, which is exactly what the traditional planning model produces, right? You drop a 5-year plan based entirely on untested assumptions.
Sure, but
You lock in your trajectory and you just march forward blindly. To understand the agile lifestyle, we have to start at the genesis of any major life change, which is setting a new direction. Instead of that rigid blueprint, I propose we adopt the concept of the personal MVP, the minimum viable product.
right, the smallest possible effort that delivers core value.
Exactly.
I mean, that works for software, obviously. But the translation from a digital product to a living, breathing person gets incredibly fraught here.
Fraud? Or just, fundamentally misunderstood? Look at the business world. Early Dropbox didn't launch with a fully featured cloud storage behemoth. They released a simple 3-minute video demonstrating the core concept just to validate demand.
Right, to see if anyone even cared.
Exactly. And Zappos. Zappos began by taking photos of shoes in local stores to test if people would even buy footwear online before they built a massive warehouse. If we apply this to a human life, before you commit to that 4-year degree for a massive career pivot, you build a personal MVP.
Okay, give me an example. What does that look like?
You shadow someone in the field for a week. You take a short, intensive online course. You are intentionally triggering a build, measure, learn loop. You build the smallest experiment. You measure your psychological and practical response to it, and you learn from actual empirical data. You gather validated learning rather than relying on hopeful speculation.
But hold on, an MVP in technology is a functional prototype. It actually works, even if it's rudimentary. An MVP in a major life challenge, say committing to a marriage, deciding to have a child, or moving across the world to a completely alien culture, that cannot be prototyped.
Well, I wouldn't say
You can't shadow a parent for a week and gather validated learning on the lifelong weight of raising a child. When you apply this to deep human experiences, an MVP is often just dipping a toe in the water. And if we treat deep life commitments as testable hypotheses, I worry we prevent ourselves from developing the resilience required for true mastery.
Okay, to be fair, the framework isn't suggesting you prototype a child.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. It's applied to the directional pivots of your life where assumptions mask reality. And honestly, dipping a toe in the water is a pretty dismissive way to frame an incredibly robust risk mitigation strategy. The build, measure, learn loop actively bypasses the sunk cost fallacy.
How so?
Well, if your hypothesis is, I want to be an architect because I love design, your MVP is working as an assistant in a firm for a month. If the empirical data you gather is that the actual day-to-day work is 90% in zoning laws and 10% design, that MVP just saved you a decade of climbing the wrong mountain.
I understand the mechanism for a career pivot. I'll give you that. But what happens when the feedback is simply discomfort? Like, if I treat moving to a new country as a hypothesis, the moment I encounter the inevitable friction of culture shock, the validated feedback tells me I'm unhappy.
But that's not...
The agile response might be to pivot, right? To abandon the experiment. But profound personal growth often requires blind commitment long before validated feedback is even possible. You have to burn the boats to truly inhabit a new reality. If everything is an MVP, we just cultivate a society of serial dabblers who never stay in this comfort long enough to be transformed by it.
That misinterprets how we measure the data, though. The build, measure, learn loop isn't about bailing at the first sign of friction. It's about establishing actionable metrics.
Actionable metrics. Okay.
Yeah, an actionable metric isn't, do I feel perfectly comfortable today? It's, is the specific friction I'm experiencing leading to the core value I hypothesized?
So differentiating between productive pain and just pain.
Precisely. If you move to a new country, the actionable metric is whether you are integrating, not whether you miss home. The personal MVP doesn't preclude commitment. It ensures that your eventual commitment is directed toward a reality, not a fantasy.
All right, even if I grant that using an MVP helps you find the right mountain, that doesn't solve the macro problem of how you actually climb it. Let's look at the daily execution of this philosophy.
The sprints.
Yes. The proposition is that we break our lives down into sprints, time-boxed, 2-week iterations, and design sprints. Look, if someone is listening to this right now while commuting to a job that exhausts them, telling them to go home and run a 2-week sprint on their personal life sounds like a punishment.
A punishment?
Yes. How does running your life like a scrum master relieve burnout rather than cause it? It sounds exhausting.
Because the alternative is what's actually exhausting them. Human beings are already on a treadmill, but it's a treadmill powered by external demands, reactive crises, and inefficient routines that just drain their cognitive load.
So adding more structure is the cure?
Yes, because the psychological relief of a sprint is that it creates boundaries. Instead of a vague, open-ended life goal like, I need to get healthier or I need to write a book, which hangs over your head every single day, you operate in focused bursts. You run a 2-week sprint.
Okay, but
You ask yourself, what did I do yesterday? What will I do today? What are my blockers? It forces radical synchronization with your actual capacity. And for major paralyzing problems, you use a design sprint.
The 5-day intensive process. Monday, you map the problem. Tuesday, you diverge. Wednesday, you converge. Thursday, you prototype. Friday, you test. It is highly, highly structured.
It's structured because it has to bypass our psychological defense mechanisms. The reason you diverge on Tuesday, sketching multiple radically different solutions without any critique allowed, isn't just a fun corporate exercise. It actively bypasses the brain's amygdala response to risk.
Bypasses the amygdala.
Yeah. By forbidding criticism, you trick your threat detection system into presenting the risky, high-reward ideas it would normally suppress. You take a complex, paralyzing life problem and you resolve the ambiguity in 5 days. You combine that with a personal Kaizen, a continuous improvement mindset, and you start eliminating muda, or the 7 wastes.
Okay, this is where I have to draw a hard line. Applying factory floor optimization to human psychology is dangerous. Let's look closely at Muda.
Sure, let's look at it.
In lean methodologies, the 7 wastes include things like waiting, excess motion, or overprocessing. In a factory, those cost money. But in a human life, what lean calls waste is exactly where creativity, psychological rest, and organic meaning actually occur.
Wait, how is waiting for perfect conditions to start a project, or overanalyzing a decision to the point of total paralysis, generating organic meaning?
because you are assuming all waiting is procrastination. Waiting is what a writer does while the subconscious untangles a plot. Excess motion is meandering through a city with no destination, which is scientifically proven to enhance divergent thinking, the very thing you just praised in your design sprint, by the way.
I think that's a bit of a stretch.
Overprocessing might just be deep philosophical reflection. The framework suggests we implement a personal 5S program. Sort, set in order, shine, standardize, sustain. We are literally treating the human mind like a Toyota manufacturing plant. Doesn't this relentless continuous improvement machine risk turning a textured life into a grueling, hyper-optimized treadmill?
No, because you're applying an overly literal translation of the 5S methodology. What does shine mean for a human being? It's not sweeping a factory floor.
Then what is it?
It is clearing your mental workspace every Friday afternoon, doing a brain dump of all your open loops so you don't carry professional anxiety into your weekend. Eliminating muda isn't about eradicating rest. It is about eradicating unintentional friction so that you actually have the space for true rest and creativity.
But the standardization...
When you standardize your work, when you apply set and order to your digital workspace, your finances, your morning routine, you are drastically reducing decision fatigue.
But the framework demands that everything be measured and optimized. If I'm running my life in 2-week sprints, the pressure to produce a potentially releasable increment, to use the Scrum terminology, never stops. What is a potentially releasable increment in a personal life?
Well, it's...
Am I supposed to ship a better version of my personality every 14 days? The psychological posture of Kaizen is that everyone, everywhere, every day improves. That induces an existential crisis. If I must wake up every single day and find an inefficiency in my character or my routine to optimize, I am inherently viewing myself as a defective product. There is no space in the Agile framework for simply being.
I have to push back on that. I disagree completely. Standardizing the mundane is exactly what protects your space to simply be. A potentially releasable increment in your personal life isn't a new personality. It's a tangible step forward.
Like what?
It's finishing the first chapter of that book or finally having that difficult conversation with your partner. It's progress, not perfection. But let's scale this up a bit. Even if I grant that eliminating daily friction gives you peace of mind today, that doesn't solve the macro problem.
Which is?
Having a perfectly optimized morning routine means absolutely nothing if the industry you work in disappears overnight. How does this framework protect our long-term identity? That brings us to adopting the innovator's lens.
Right, the distinction between disruptive and sustaining innovation.
Yes, we know from business history that established companies fail because they suffer from the innovator's dilemma. They focus all their resources on sustaining innovation, making their current products slightly better for their current customers.
Playing it safe.
Exactly. They ignore simple, entirely new technologies because they don't seem profitable at first. Eventually, that disruptive innovation redefines the market, and the legacy company collapses. Individuals do the exact same thing. They over-index on their current strengths.
So you're saying our expertise becomes our blind spot?
A massive blind spot. Let's look at a real-world scenario. You are a highly paid graphic designer, so you spend all your time getting slightly better at legacy design software. That is sustaining innovation. Meanwhile, generative AI emerges.
Which is terrifying for a lot of designers.
Right. It's clunky at first, the output isn't great, it doesn't pay well. But it is a disruptive innovation. To survive, the Agile framework proposes that we must become a perpetual pioneer. We have to deliberately carve out time and resources to disrupt ourselves. We must experiment with entirely new, uncomfortable, and initially unlucrative paths to spot disruption before it renders our core identity obsolete.
I understand the economic logic there, I really do. But consider the profound psychological toll of being a perpetual pioneer. You are essentially advocating for preemptive self-destruction.
Self-destruction, come on.
To use an investment analogy, treating your career like a single stock might be risky, but what you are advocating for is constantly shorting your own stock. If we are constantly tearing up our own foundations to disrupt ourselves before the market does, we never actually grow a foundation.
We aren't tearing up the foundation. We are diversifying it. Being a perpetual pioneer is essentially building an identity index fund. You dedicate 90% of your energy to the blue chip stock, your main career, your sustaining innovation.
Okay.
But you dedicate 10% to high-risk, high-reward angel investments in new skills, like learning generative AI.
But the startup way dictates autonomous teams constantly experimenting with unproven niches. Translating that to a single human psyche means living in a state of permanent instability. It frames human aging and deepening expertise as a liability rather than an asset.
That's
To avoid being outpaced by the market, do I ever achieve the stability necessary for deep human fulfillment? The language of this framework, sprints, continuous deployment, actionable metrics, killing your darlings, it fundamentally reshapes how we view our own worth. It replaces a search for meaning with a search for efficiency.
Orc. It replaces paralyzing fear of the unknown with a system of actionable evidence-based learning. Look, stability in a rapidly evolving technological and economic landscape is an illusion. The ground is shifting beneath us, whether we want it to or not.
Well, that's undeniably true.
Right. So becoming an agile individual doesn't mean you abandon your core values. It means your methods for expressing those values remain endlessly adaptable.
My concern is just what happens when that system becomes the master rather than the servant. While rapid feedback is absolutely useful, and I don't deny the psychological utility of a design sprint to solve an acute, paralyzing logistical problem, forcing the deeply irrational reality of a human life into relentless optimization is dangerous. The anxiety that you are never quite optimized enough, that you haven't sufficiently disrupted yourself today, it's a heavy burden to carry.
Which brings us to the crucial point of balance. We've pressure tested these methodologies extensively today, so to summarize my stance, applying agile, lean, and design thinking to life's challenges isn't about turning humans into machines. It is a profoundly empowering system.
If used correctly.
Exactly. It moves us away from brittle, fixed plan thinking. By treating our assumptions as hypotheses, using the MVP to avoid climbing the wrong mountain, and using sprints to manage our cognitive load, we can navigate a world of constant change with purpose and resilience.
And to summarize my stance, while identifying waste and seeking empirical feedback are valuable heuristics, we must reject the premise that a human life is a product to be iterated. The pressure of continuous improvement and relentless self-disruption threatens to strip away the unmeasured, inefficient spaces. The wandering, the waiting, the deep, unbroken commitments, where true joy and organic meaning actually reside.
If we look at the methodologies presented in the Agile Edge as a whole, I would frame them as a vital, critical filter. If you have complex, stuck areas of your professional or personal life, a career pivot that feels paralyzing, a project that is draining your energy but going nowhere, deploying a design sprint or defining a personal MVP is likely the exact catalyst you need to break the inertia.
I agree they are powerful tools for unsticking a stuck project. But the listener must act as the ultimate filter, ensuring that they are using these frameworks to manage their life, rather than allowing efficiency metrics and the anxiety of constant optimization to manage them.
At the start of our discussion, we asked what happens when the traditional 5-year blueprint is dead. Perhaps the ultimate takeaway isn't that we replace the grand blueprint with a hyper-optimized machine, but that we learn to become comfortable navigating the ambiguity.
Yeah.
We are in murky waters, and whether you choose to run 2-week sprints through them or carefully chart a course, the goal is to keep moving. Keep learning from reality and keep asking yourself what truly matters.
A question worth sitting with, regardless of the framework you use to answer it.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, keep questioning the frameworks that shape your world.